Hello and welcome to the special edition of The Buck Stops Here. We're broadcasting today from the NITI Aayog, which is, of course, the government's main policy think tank. The subject is, of course, what else? Demonetization, notebandi, currency swap, call it what you will. Of course, politics has hijacked a serious discussion around demonetization. We saw that in Parliament. We saw the charges made by Rahul Gandhi accusing the Prime Minister directly of graft based on documents that have in fact not been accepted by the Supreme Court as authentic or valid. The Prime Minister hitting back today, saying, quipping, in fact, joking, saying, well, at least Rahul Gandhi spoke, so there won't be an earthquake now. The Prime Minister has also hit out at the opposition, saying just like Pakistan provides covering fire to terrorists coming in from across the border, the opposition is providing covering fire to the corrupt with its position and its opposition to demonetization. On the program today to take your questions and to take questions from a live audience of young students is Bibek Debroy, one of the leading economists of our time. He's, of course, a senior member of the NITI Aayog, an author, a public intellectual, and a man known not to pull his punches. Welcome to the program. We're almost getting to the end of the month, which will be the 50 days that the Prime Minister asked for. Clearly, there were some hardships that the government had not anticipated itself, which is reflected in the changing notifications of the RBI, which is adapting to a constantly changing situation. How do you think the process has gone so far, and what were things that you did not anticipate that have in fact happened?
Well, let's take that in bits and pieces. But before that, let me welcome everyone here. 8th of November and what happened in 8th of November, one must understand that as part of a broader jigsaw. There are several other initiatives that the government has done, will do. So this is just one instrument. Something on this larger scale has never been attempted in the past. No matter how perfectly you plan it, there will be glitches. Unless you say, I don't care about secrecy at all. In any such situation, the government, RBI, Finance Ministry, takes certain decisions. Those decisions are based on certain considerations. I decide A, B, C, D. It's perfectly possible that Barkha or Bibek sitting there might have decided on some other ways of handling it. Each of these lead to unforeseen contingencies, things you did not anticipate. That's in the nature of things. But it's not as if some other criteria would have necessarily been universally superior. There would have been glitches. I think one of the things that was not really anticipated was the misuse of the exchange provisions. Now, of course, it was anticipated there would be misuse, but the scale of that was not anticipated. The last point I want to mention is obviously there is a shortage, was a shortage of notes. Notes per se and lower denomination in particular.
Right.
If you have got a shortage, you need to ration. And it was a conscious decision to redistribute the smaller denomination notes to the rural areas. So there is a shortage of notes in general. There is a shortage of smaller denomination notes. And I think if it is notes in banks, it will ease off certainly, if not by the end of this month, by the first week of January. There's every sign. But please do understand that the ATMs are a different proposition. I'm constantly surprised that people don't realize that once the notes are there with bank branches, they are conveyed to ATMs by outsourced private parties.
Yes.
There aren't too many private parties. They have constraints in terms of the number of vans they have, the number of security guards they have. So banks, the problem easing is one thing. ATMs, it easing is a slightly different one.
But you know, questions have been raised even by strong supporters of the demonetization. Let me take Meghnad Desai, for example. He says it's a wonderfully bold move. It's the boldest move an Indian politician has taken, but that the Prime Minister has been let down by his bureaucracy, that the bureaucrats are out of touch with how ordinary people actually spend their money or line up at a bank or what they spend cash on and what they pay digitally for. Would you concede that the red maze, the sort of the red tape of bureaucracy has let this sort of experiment down?
I think one should be a bit hesitant about using labels, and let me explain what I mean by that. take this is not Meghnad Desai, this is other people citing old figures on financial inclusion about number of people who have bank accounts, don't have bank accounts.
So 53%, for example, now, according to the World Bank, you don't accept that figure.
It's not a question, I will explain that in a minute. All these figures are old figures. The government's Jan Dhan Yojana figures say 258 million now. Jan Dhan Yojana.
Yes.
You don't believe the government's figures? Recently, ICE or Price, Rama Bijapurkar and Rajesh Shukla, they brought out a report on households and amenities. What does this show? This shows that 97-98% of households in India, rural, urban combined, have bank accounts. So the financial inclusion debate is not about they're not possessing bank accounts. It's about the fact that even poor households, when they have a little piece of plastic, think that piece of plastic only entitles them to withdraw money from ATMs. They still do not realize they can use those to do other kinds of transactions. Yeah. There are issues connected with the fact that there have been disincentives against using non-cash instruments. And not sufficient incentives in favor of using non-cash. For example, the Payments of Wages Act, which was just amended through an ordinance because the bill got stuck, Section 6 of that still mandates that you must pay in cash. Now, one must remember all of this. Now, coming back to the bureaucracy begins at the top, goes right all the way down to the bottom. What has received inadequate attention, and this is not contingent on 8th of November, it should have received attention independent of that, is the Currency Management Department of the RBI, which has been very low profile. No one has paid a great deal of attention to it. And many of these problems emanate from the fact that the information flow from the Currency Management Division upwards has been very imperfect. Why on earth should we have had to wait till the 8th of November to realize that 50% of the ATMs were not working in the first place?
Exactly.
So there was an information vacuum, and something or the other triggers it, because unless there is a sudden trigger, then you don't necessarily have the kinds of adjustments that are required. Finally, on the RBI, I forgot to answer that question. Instead of criticizing the RBI, and I know that all kinds of people are making wisecracks about RBI and the acronym and whatever.
Reserve Bank of India because of 60 notifications in 43 days.
Yeah, I think we should look at it in a positive light, in the sense that in this day and age, if there are inputs from people, if citizens complain that you did not anticipate this, that and the other, then if the RBI is saying that, okay, even without using the word mistake, if the RBI is saying, fine, we are willing to tweak it, we'll take a re-look at it, I think we should applaud that. Instead of the RBI, would you have preferred a situation where the RBI says that no, I've stuck to this template and I will not change that template till the end of December?
No, it's better to correct your mistake, but some would say, why were there so many, what the opposition calls flip-flops? Let's take the last one, the 5,000 rupee deposits. The finance minister was on record saying, you have till the 30th of December, don't panic, right?
This one, look, sometimes things happen in a hurry. This particular one, I think, was just bad wording. There is a slight difference between where you fail to anticipate something and then you correct it. I gave the example of the exchange. This particular one, I think, was just hasty drafting. And this correction was really correcting for that hasty drafting.
But you are conceding that on the ATMs, for example, and the fact that 50% of them would, were not functional for the new notes that you needed, this information came to the government too late. Or later than it should have?
Later than it should have.
When did you exactly discover this?
Well, I don't know about the precise date, but certainly on the 8th of November, one had not known that almost 50% of the ATMs were not functioning.
Now, I'm going to open this up for questions from our young friends in just a moment. But Mr. Debroy, do you believe that there's anything with the benefit of hindsight that should have been factored in and wasn't? There have been comments made, for example, this was the sowing season, this was the shadika season, or that more lower denomination notes should have been printed, because to print 2,000 rupee notes without change in circulation was becoming pointless.
No. You see, look, some decisions were taken on the basis of information that was available, and I can try and explain the rationale for some of those. And there were instances where you did not really anticipate. You did not anticipate the quality of the Indian innovative mind
The
in
jugaad.
thinking of jugaad to try and torpedo whatever the government was trying to do, including the exchange.
Yeah.
You see, look at it from that point of view. Look at the Indian calendar. There is always some agricultural season or the other. There is always some festive season or the other. The only proper window that you really have, quite irrespective of the fact that there would have been a the code of conduct would have kicked in,
The model code of conduct,
and you would
yeah.
had to wait for the Diwali to be over in any case. The only real window you have is the summer months. Can you imagine what would have happened if people were to be queuing outside banks and ATMs in the summer months? So that way, don't think that there were too many degrees of freedom and there were too many windows where we could have done something like this. It wasn't that easy. All right, now secrecy. So therefore, you have got constraints in terms of the RBI presses and the government presses. The more higher denomination you print, the more value of notes you can get out. In other words, if I print 2,000, I can print double the value of currency that I would have had been in a position to print had I printed only 1,000.
That's true, but you also need more smaller notes because you need change.
Yes, but there's a trade-off. This isn't a perfect world.
Yeah.
If I print 500, a few people will get 500 rupee notes, but a lot more people will be deprived of notes. So this was a conscious decision of printing 2,000. Whether the higher denomination should have been 2,000 or 3,000, no one can actually defend because there's some subjectivity there. But the conscious decision was that if we want to get more value of notes out, we need that higher denomination because we will need double the amount of time to print the smaller denomination. Remember, this is not just about printing. It's also about the logistics. Do realize that in several parts of the country, these new currency notes have been airlifted. So do you realize how many more planes, how many more trains, etc., etc.? In other words, the shortage would have been accentuated.
Okay, we're going to start taking questions. In fact, there is somebody who's written in with a question on the 2,000 rupee notes. Uruj Fatima.
The issuing of 2,000 rupee notes, isn't this contradictory to the government stand that higher denomination currency in fact encourages black money? Also,
Where did the government say that?
to quote RSS ideologue S. Gurumurthy, he in fact said that these notes will be withdrawn from circulation in a couple of years.
Well, that was his personal view. He did clarify, but he did say that the 2,000 rupee notes should also be treated as a stopgap arrangement.
So please correct your question. The government has never said that a higher denomination note leads to black money. Where has the government said it? Not that. The only person who said that is Mr. Gurumurthy. So you should ask Mr. Gurumurthy for the answer to that question. I also happen to think, personally, not NITI ideologue, not representative of the government, that with inflation, we do need higher denomination notes.
So personally, you do not agree with Mr. Gurumurthy's view that these notes would eventually have to be phased out, which is his personal view and not the government's view again.
No. Personally,
Yes.
there is a 2,000 rupee denomination note of a certain variety. It is perfectly possible we will have a better 2,000 rupee note, plastic coated, better security features, and this present series will be phased out. It's perfectly possible that instead of a 2,000 rupee note, we might have a 3,000, we might have more of 1,500. How should I know? That one has to wait for the RBI and the finance minister to decide.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is personally, because of inflation, and remember in 1978 we had notes of far, far higher denomination. I personally think we need a denomination that is higher than 500. 500 alone will not suffice.
Okay, let's take the next question. Shubhi Singh. Yeah. Now, these are all, many of them are students of economics. Shubhi is from the Delhi School of Economics.
Yeah.
Let's get her a mic here.
So, sir, I'm sure you'll agree that only demonetization is not enough and that it should be backed by a more streamlined taxation system. So then do you agree that in the upcoming budget, the government should increase the tax exempted income from 2.5 to 4 lakhs as is already being speculated?
This question is premature because what the government intends to do, people in India have been remarkably patient. So be a little bit more patient. The 1st of February is not that far away. We will know on the 1st of February what the government intends to do. But as a student of economics, please appreciate this. Managing a government's budget is not very different from the way you manage your own budget. With the same amount of money, you can have a pizza or you can buy a book. Assuming Delhi school allows you to buy books as opposed to photocopying books.
Which we all did.
Now wait. So there is a trade-off. Exactly the same way there is a trade-off in terms of the government's resources. Every tax relief that I give you means the governments cannot spend that money on railways, national highways. So there is a trade-off between the immediate short-term gains and the slightly medium-term gains which improve the economy's potential, productive potential. So the call, which is a tough call for any government and therefore for the finance minister, is a trade-off call. And the answer to that we will know on the 1st of February.
But may I just probe that deeper, because even in your own opening comments you said this is one measure, right? This is only one measure. It's not some standalone be-all and end-all measure. Now there have been economists who have pointed out that the predominant amount of black money does not reside in cash. It resides in gold, silver, real estate and overseas bank accounts. Therefore, for what is about 6% to maybe 10% of which is estimated to be the black money that resides in cash, was this pain worth the gain?
Firstly, this was always about the existing stock of black. It was not about the creation of fresh black income, for which the government has already taken steps and will continue to take steps. On the 8th of November, the Finance Ministry's press release already mentioned the various steps that had been taken, and clearly in the future one will have to have more steps, and I believe that the government will introduce those steps, particularly addressing certain segments of the economy which have been prone to misuse of cash, like gold, not jewelry, real estate, stock markets, capital markets, and of course the much more ticklish problem of electoral funding and the way elections are handled in this country.
Questions on that, and we'll
so
take
those are separate issues. So far as the existing black stock is concerned, there are also measures to address, for instance, the black that is held in non-cash form. One example of that is the real estate, and some measures like the restriction on how much you can pay in cash predate 8th of November. Now let's therefore just talk about the stock that is
already
black,
there,
that is already there, the black cash.
Yeah.
Is one saying, one can debate the figures because no one has any firm figures, no one outside, nor does the government.
You've actually said no one actually knows how much black money we have.
Indisputable empirical data with a robust methodology, because black is not informal.
Right.
Black has to have a notion of illegality associated
Tax
with
evaded
it,
and unaccounted for.
or activities which are actually illegal. The last proper estimate methodologically, whether you believe it or not, goes back to the year 1984-85, which was done by the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, which found that roughly around 20% of GDP was black. So out of this stock, I think everyone's guess would have been about 10% would have been black. There has been an erosion in value of that 10%. Is someone saying that because it is only 10%, we should take no action? That cannot be a valid line of argument. But the reason I think most citizens are prepared to tolerate the inconvenience is because they perceive 8th of November as part of the broader jigsaw of institutional cleansing and not just per se in terms of this 10%.
I agree with that, but you know this, the latest figures say 13 lakh crores nearly is back in the banks in the form of deposits, right? 12 point something, which I'm rounding it off and saying almost 13 lakh crores. Now, 37,000 crore surge in Jan Dhan since this demonetization was announced. This to me, and I'm no economist, suggests in a commonsensical way, either the money has been laundered as it comes back into the banks, or there has been a miscalculation of how much black money was out there in these denominations. Which one is it? And what does that do to the government's hope that some of this unaccounted for money could have been used for welfare spending?
Well, neither actually, because I think people who are commenting are misunderstanding it a little bit. Firstly, let's get the base clear. And the reason I'm mentioning the base is because there's a RBI balance sheet figure, because it's a balance sheet figure, it's a slightly old figure of 14 lakh crores of high denomination. And there is a subsequent figure, which is 8th of November, that's 16 lakhs. Let's stick to that 16 lakhs figure because that's a more robust figure.
Right.
So far as the money that has come into the system, there are different kinds of estimates floating around. The really firm one is about 11.5, but let's not quibble about that. I know the SBI chairperson has given a slightly different figure. Let's presume at the end of it, and the end of the month is not all that far away, and I believe that most of the people who would have brought in the money have already brought in the money. So let's say...
So you don't think too much more will come back?
I don't think so, personally. So let's say even 14 lakhs comes back. So there is 2 lakhs left.
2 lakh
And the 2 lakhs left is roughly in conformity or with that 10% figure. Now this is something that gets completely extinguished, completely destroyed. But no one in the government, to the best of my knowledge, has ever said that all the black is the bit that gets extinguished. Because the money that has come into the system also has a substantial amount of black. And
just because it has come in does not mean that it's been cleansed of its blackness and has become white. Because particularly if it comes in under the second income declaration scheme, you will have to pay taxes, you will have to pay penalties, and if you have laundered, I know you have not laundered, so I don't mean you personally, but if someone has laundered and instead of 1,000 rupees has got back 350 rupees in return, that's also an erosion in value. So far as the money that's come into the system is concerned, it is still subject to scrutiny, it's still subject to seizure, and therefore to suggest that this has all become legitimized, I don't think is correct. But you know, there's also been a kind of Robin Hood-esque sort of justification in some quarters. You had Jagdish Bhagwati, who actually said to me in an interview that I think this is fine because it's redistributive, it's expansionary. Let the poor get a cut if they're getting it. What's wrong? You in fact had the Prime Minister making a political comment saying, look, if the poor have been used as vehicles by the corrupt in their Jan Dhan, keep the money, we'll find the culprits. Do you agree with this sort of Robin Hood economics?
No, but let's not sort of caricature the Robin Hood part of it.
I'm not caricaturing, it's a genuine question.
There's a sort of broader issue, and let me flag the broader issue. The money that is coming into the government is coming in through 3 different channels, and let's distinguish between these 3 different channels because they are not synonymous. One is the extinguishing, which let's say is 2 lakh crores, that reduces the RBI's liabilities. Now, how the RBI handles that vis-a-vis the Finance Ministry, we will have to wait for the clarification. There is a second part which comes into the banks, mostly public sector banks. It eases their problems with stressed assets, enables them to lend more. In principle, that lending can also be even more to the MSME sector. So in that sense, that's a progressive thing rather than a retrogressive thing. And finally, we have the money that's come into the government's coffers, Consolidated Fund of India. Here I've got a kitty of money, which I can spend either on the tax exemptions kinds of things that she mentioned, special tax deals, or I can spend it on public goods and services, and the public goods and services benefit the poor. So yes, there is a transfer because presumably most of this black was held by the relatively rich, and the public expenditure in whatever form is going to be for the relatively poor. So yes, there is the Robin Hood thing in that sense of a transfer of resources from the relatively rich to the relatively poor.
But you are saying you don't expect all the 16 lakh crore that is out there, which is the 86% that was taken out, to come back in deposits. You don't expect that by the 30th of December.
I would still think that about 2 lakh crores will remain. But also, one other thing I should quickly say, because again, too many people are commenting without realizing it. Even if a certain sum of money is declared under these various schemes, that is not the quantum of money that the government gets as tax revenue. because the government only gets a certain percentage of that as tax, revenue or penalty.
Yeah, so will that be significant, you think? That was my question,
We
given
will,
how much money is
we
back.
will really have to wait, because anything that I say now will be a complete guess. But I would think if I take away, you see, look, some money had already come in even before the 8th of November. If I take that away, I would be very surprised, and it's a completely wild guess.
Yeah.
I would be very surprised if the amount of extra money, revenue that
Yes.
came to the government was significantly above 50,000 crores. As an increment, and I'm saying tax cum penalty, an outer limit I would say is 1 lakh crores. But I'm inclined to think 50 is more
But
likely.
is that
maybe
in
some-
conformity with what the government had expected, or had you expected more?
No, I don't think anyone had any expectations. Anyone
Or
had any
hoped for.
expectations, because everyone had realized that even before the 8th of November, and I'm not just talking about the first income declaration scheme, because the first income declaration scheme was in conjunction with various measures that the income tax department had taken. Already about 2 lakh crores had come in.
Yeah.
So I don't think one could have, not that there were any official estimates, I don't think anyone expected a huge amount to come in.
Okay, I'm going to take some more questions. Ankita Singh?
Sir, when the government introduced demonetization, apart from curbing black money, they justified it as a way to reduce terrorism financing. But there have been a lot of reports of shootings in Kashmir where people are attacking ATMs to take the money out. So how does the government plan on tackling that?
Well, attacking ATMs is not the same thing as terrorism. So I
The
wouldn't,
terrorists
I wouldn't,
themselves
I wouldn't
are-
put the two of them together. But you see, on the terrorism, let's, and this is her area really, not terrorism, but
no.
discussions
Yeah,
on
yeah.
terrorism.
Now you're sounding like a Twitter troll.
But look, I think the important thing to realize is that when Mr. Chidambaram talks about 400 crores, that's a slightly old figure. So whether it is 400 crores or whether it's 2,000 crores is not really the issue. The issue is even small bits of fake currency can have disproportionately high negative externalities in terms of the impact they have on terrorism kind of activities. So yes, regardless of the figure, because I have no idea how much it actually cost directly in Bombay, it would have been peanuts.
Yeah.
Or even in 9/11, the sum would have been very small. So let's not look at that absolute figure. It is something that needs to be addressed, but also something like fake currency is a constant battle. It's not that you take a measure and overnight it solves the problem for perpetuity, because it's like any other crime. You use technology as an enforcer, the criminal also uses technology to try and circumvent whatever you're trying to do. So it's a constant battle. All that you're doing when you have a stroke like this is you're demolishing the present fake apparatus and equipment that's in place. That will also be replaced, so you will also constantly have to enhance your security features.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Siddhant Agarwal.
Sir, Amartya Sen called demonetization a despotic step and disastrous. Jagdish Bhagwati called it very courageous and with potential for, lots of long-term gains. My question is, sir, that these are objective social scientists, but they have completely divergent views on the same topic. So aren't they playing cheerleaders to their favorite teams? And what's your view on this? Thank you.
Well, again, this is a question that you should ask either of them. They have been cheerleaders in the past as well for their respective teams, whatever those teams were. And whatever position one of them takes, you can be reasonably certain that the other one will have an opposite point of view. And I'm not making snide remarks along the lines of Churchill on Keynes. But more seriously, economists have a herd mentality, like any other species of social scientists. So they are very reluctant to recommend policies that in some sense smack of risk. So ex ante, are you an economist? Ex-ante economists will always say, stick with the status quo. Ex-post, they will always explain to you, and I am an economist also, the ex-post, they will always explain to you why you should not have stuck to the status quo. If I try to evaluate what has happened on 8th of November and try to gauge it on narrow economic considerations, every economist will say, don't do it. Because the justification for what has happened is not narrow economic cost-benefit calculations, but the institutional cleansing of the system, which is not purely a political agenda. It's not a narrow political agenda either. It's not in terms of what's going to happen in the UP elections. Yeah. But it's an institutional cleansing of real estate, gold, capital markets, electoral funding, all of that. That's the perspective which the narrowly trained, and today's economist is very narrow in perspective. It is not like the old classical economists where Adam Smith was also a philosopher in some sense. His chair was that, where you had a broader perspective. So every economist worth his salt, and I'm not worth my salt, I'm worth my pepper, as you can see. Every economist worth his salt would have opposed this policy. They would have said, this is quoting Humphrey Appleby, they would have said that is courageous, and what is the other word? One of them leads to loss in votes, the other one leads to loss in elections.
They may not be philosopher economists today, but I think you're close to one. And let's raise a philosophical question here. The philosophical question is this on the nature of the state and how much power it should have vis-a-vis people who follow the rules, pay their taxes, are in fact not the Vijay Mallya's or Lalit Modi's, are not very rich, not the big fat cats. Most ordinary Indians might ask you, Mr. Debroy, I did everything by the law. Does the state have the right to tell me in what form I can withdraw my money? It's my own money, it's tax-paid money. These restrictions are a bit offensive. Are you worried that for a government that came in promising maximum governance and minimum government, we may see a great empowerment of the tax authorities, a kind of return of the raid raj that some of us remember from the 80s?
Firstly, some of these restrictions, as I said in a little while earlier, they are temporary. I do not believe that the restrictions on withdrawing our money from our bank accounts will last for very long.
Will they end on the 30th of December or not
that
necessarily?
That is for the RBI to announce and Finance Ministry to announce. But I will be very surprised if they continue beyond the end of the month for withdrawal from bank accounts.
As opposed to ATMs.
As opposed to ATMs, because I explained to you the problem with the ATMs. The exchange instrument we know have been misused. What happens to the exchange, I do not know. But so far as withdrawing our money is concerned, I don't think there should be any issue. I think the broader issue is that in many of these sectors we have been talking about, there has been an absence of regulation, an absence of enforcement. Minimum government and maximum governance does not only mean reduced government, it also means better enforcement and better regulation. One of the problems is that despite many citizens being honest, it is also a fact that a large number of citizens have gamed the system. And what this institutional cleansing will do is make it difficult to prevent, to do that gaming of the system, to do the kind of jugaad. And one of the things we are also talking about in the process, not as a conscious objective of this, but an outcome of this, is a churn which will lead to a greater degree of formalization and organized sector activities, including in real estate, which I personally think is extremely, extremely desirable. All of us are familiar with the system of buying a TV. Kacha raseed chahiye, pakka raseed chahiye. And look, you said most of us are honest, but several of us or your parents will have opted for the kacha raseed. That is being complicit in the act of gaming. Now, one of the things, not 8th November is not supposed to solve all of this, but remember there is GST. And what GST will do is it will broaden the base.
But you're not very hopeful because of the parliament jhagda over this of the April 1st rollout. That seems impossible now.
I'm a bit hesitant. I sort of agree with you, but I'm also a bit hesitant. We are overreacting because of what happened in Parliament. By the time it comes to the budget session, I think we will all settle down. We will give up the knee-jerk reactions. So I am not saying I'm certain about 1st of April. I am not, which is why I said I agree with you a little bit. But I'm a bit more hopeful perhaps of 1st of April. I've not completely given it up.
September may be more likely.
But 1st September may be more likely.
Okay, let's take the next question. Ravi Masta, Ravi?
Sir, I want to ask regarding the legal framework related to the political parties. It has some loopholes which can be exploited to hide the black money, like the Non-Disclosure Act for donations under 20,000. So I want to ask, what are your views on it? Like, do we need a more comprehensive legislation so that we have a robust mechanism to bring in more accountability and transparency?
And sir, NITI Aayog has been working on political reform, and for a lot of people, this is a very key question, that if one aim is to clean up the system, as you say, how or why should people go cashless if political parties aren't willing to do the same?
People say that in India, given the nature of the Indian economy, you require cash. Of course you do. And no one is suggesting that cash disappears in India. But India is not remarkably different from neighboring countries like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Pakistan. You will find that the Indian cash GDP ratio has increased dramatically over the last, let's say, 15 odd years. And you will find that the Indian cash GDP ratio is at least 4 times as high as that of Bangladesh, etc., etc. So let's also recognize that too much of cash floating around in the Indian system, and some of it is linked to black, however defined. One is not saying one goes cashless overnight. No, by no means. Cleaning of the political system is a long, long haul. There are all kinds of different dimensions to this. The auditing of the income statements of political parties is only a small part of that. There is a broader electoral reform agenda that's not going to be resolved in a hurry. All one can say is that at least now it's there as part of the broader political discourse. At least that entry has been achieved. The last point I want to make, I think whether I withdraw cash from the bank or not, or prefer to use a non-cash instrument, should be a matter of my choice. What should, however, happen is there should be some transactions where there should be a ceiling on what can be paid for in cash. Already there is a ceiling of sorts even before the 8th of November.
Yeah, you have to show a PAN card for certain transactions.
So similarly, if I'm buying gold, if I'm traveling abroad, I think there is absolutely every reason for there to be a ceiling based on the type of transaction, not as a curb on my being able to withdraw cash from the banking system.
But there is a great deal of confusion, just to come back to the political parties. After 8th November, if parties did receive donations and they received them in old notes and these were under 20,000 rupees, which means they don't have to disclose this, do they enjoy a different standard from what the people in this room do?
You're bringing in two things. One is the old notes, and the other is, did they have
notes
a differential?
Yes.
But this has been inherited as a legacy.
Yes.
It needs to be changed, but to do that, you need the political consensus. To the best of my understanding, there is nothing that permits political parties over and above that to do anything in the nature of old notes.
So what would have happened to the donations they got in this last 40 days?
They would have managed it.
Exactly, but that would make people cynical. What does it mean to manage it?
So that comes back to the earlier thing, that people have also managed, which is how it has come in. Now, whichever form of management you do, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that the law on political parties should not be changed. Of course it should be changed.
Yeah.
But whatever managing you do, there will have been some erosion in value.
Would you support what some economists have said, that parties must accept even 1 rupee now by check?
I would, but I would subject to a threshold, a low enough threshold, because I'm prepared to grant this much. But that often political parties have small individuals as members or supporters, and sometimes it might be 100 rupees, it might be 200 rupees. So therefore, I accept the philosophy and I would support it, but probably above a certain threshold.
Okay, let's take a couple of questions quickly now. We're short on time. Pallavi?
So my question was largely on what we discussed at the beginning of the show regarding the exchange. We see how the deposit, exchange and withdrawal limits have been changing constantly. And it's one thing for the people to understand and comply with the newer rules because yes, the government says the circumstances change. There's a law that we didn't foresee. But it's another thing when an institution like the RBI goes back on its word. Now what this creates is distrust among the people who were earlier supporting the move also.
Well, either that is a comment or I've already answered the question.
You have already answered it. But let's try and push you a little more on that because you said the last 5,000 rupee deposit confusion was poor wording, right? Do you think, because this is one of the criticisms that has come, that there needed to be more clear daily communication from the RBI? That's one thing that even supporters of this have suggested. Point one. Two, you've had very scathing comments about the RBI and the governor from many different commentators. You've had people saying the RBI has become a laughing stock, for example, outside India, and that the RBI is seeming like an extension of the government, like a political arm of the government. This is a criticism that has come. How would you respond to that?
I dislike the idea of people taking pot shots at the RBI governor, regardless of who the RBI governor happens to be. Because the RBI governor is in a constitutional position where he is unable to answer to this calumny and canard. So I think it is unethical to do that. It should not be done regardless of whoever the RBI governor is. I do think that the RBI should have been more communicative.
Yeah.
It is a different matter that Dr. Urijit Patel, who's a friend, is a little less communicative than his predecessor.
Little less is a lovely ironic understatement.
But I do think the RBI, if not the RBI governor, should have been little bit more communicative.
Yeah.
The last bit is the RBI is acting as an extension of the government. It hasn't quite, if you look at the decision on the policy rates.
Yeah,
in this particular 8th November thing, it's a crisis of sorts. So when you've got a crisis of sorts, the RBI and Finance Ministry do need to work in tandem. So something that is predicated on 8th of November, I would say that should not be extended to a general comment about relationships between RBI and Finance Ministry.
All right, Sangat Bose.
Actually, my question was based on what you had started the talk on regarding poor having the financial equipment to handle the current digitization process. So you said correctly that these people treat the little plastic pieces as the only instruments of withdrawing the cash. But do they actually understand that what all fundamentals are needed for such a technological equipment? And does the government provide the basic necessities in the most remotest of villages?
And also, just to add a brief thing, Chidambaram and others have made the point about how ATMs are not equally distributed. The Northeast, for example, has much fewer and so on, that they're concentrated largely in urban areas. Just to add to that point of the equipment or the infrastructure.
That point I have a comment about, and then I shall ignore that because that comment might be blown out of all proportion.
No, then please don't. No, you must make that comment.
No, I seriously think that ATMs as we have known them in the past may very well be on their way out.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is several alternative instruments are now taking over, including the micro ATMs and the handheld devices. So I'm not even very sure whether for banks it will make commercial sense to have those ATMs anymore. That's why I said there is an entire churn going on. Yeah. Now, so far as your comment is concerned, I would still be a little bit hesitant to generalize, because even amongst poorer households, and particularly amongst the young, not the older ones, I have found ones who are much more technology savvy than I am. And there are ones who are, they almost have a block. What I think all of this is doing, and it is not a miracle that's going to solve things overnight, is gradually persuading the poor, something that they should have been persuaded to start off with, that look, there are other things that you can do. You don't even need that plastic card. Your smartphone will do. After all, we have 800 million mobile connections, and about 300 of them are smartphones. I think part of the challenge still is access to electricity, much more than many of the other things. It's a different matter that I may have electricity in the village, but that does not necessarily mean I've got access to electricity.
So when the estimate is given that it could take 6 months before all of the cash is replaced, you're actually saying you're hoping that the movement away from cash takes place in that time period?
Yes, but again, don't misunderstand what I've said. How much was the cash? The cash was 16 lakhs.
Yes.
Let's say, do I need 16 lakhs to be replenished? I think not. I think because of what I said about what is required to fuel transactions, something like 10 lakhs is more than enough. So I don't expect there to be any requirement for 16 lakhs to be brought back.
How much would you think needs to be brought back, and how much time would you estimate it would take?
I would say 10 to 11. Now, so far as what has already been brought back, I have seen two different figures coming from two very credible sources. Both figures came out yesterday. One of them said 6.5 has come back. The other one said 8 has come back. So I presume what has come back or is coming back is in the neighborhood of 8 or thereabouts. I would therefore hazard a guess that the worst of it will be over certainly by the first week of Jan, if not by the end of December, so far as the banks are concerned, not the ATMs.
Not the ATMs. But the ATMs you think will continue to have a problem till when?
ATMs, you see, look, we've got 210,000 ATMs. I think we have a serious problem with about 1 lakh of those. So I would say that a lakh of ATMs, and this is purely my personal guess, should be okay. Well, I won't say the first week of January because I mentioned the distribution, the logistics problem from the banks to the ATMs. So I'd say 15th of Jan. But the other ATMs, I have serious doubts.
But that could cause panic among people, and you're saying we need to push them towards other forms, go back to the banks actually instead of the ATMs.
They should in any case go use the other forms.
Okay, a couple of more questions and then we don't have actually time. There's another Ankita. I believe there are 2 Ankitas in this hall. Is there another Ankita? Yes.
Taking the discussion on a lighter note, obviously demonetization came as a shock for every ordinary man. So was it a shock for NITI Aayog too, or you were informed before?
Did you know?
I love Humphrey Appleby. Can you keep a secret? So can I.
So from which we can safely deduce that you knew. How many people knew?
You won't get an answer to that for the very simple reason that this is not a WhatsApp group where you necessarily know who's part of the group and who's not part of the group.
Okay, fair enough. A last question, I think also on a lighter note. Siddhant, where are you? Siddhant, yeah.
Hello, sir. This is a tongue-in-cheek question, so forgive me. You have this deep association with Mahabharat. So I'll ask you to venture and say that which Mahabharat characters would you ascribe to Prime Minister Modi, Rahul Gandhi and Kejriwal?
I happen to believe that the Mahabharat is largely based on fact, not fiction. So 2 of these people, to my mind, belong in the realm of fiction, and one has certainly been taken to the realm of fiction by this book called Unreal Aliens. So far as the Prime Minister is concerned, I don't think one should equate him with any particular character. But what one should ask is the following. Particularly in the Mahabharat, there is a situation where the sage Narad comes to Yudhishthir and asks, is everything well with your kingdom? And asks a set of questions. All of those questions are centered around the state of the poor. I would say that those questions, even though this is a different day and age, are extremely relevant for the present Prime Minister and every Prime Minister, because the counterpart of the king today is the government.
Yeah. So quickly on that note, you have a former head of government suggesting that the GDP could be shaved off by 2%, Manmohan Singh. I do want to give you a last comment to respond to that.
I wanted to duck that question. The reason I wanted to duck that question is there are some economists here or students training in economics. GDP is a very, very technical term, and one should not shoot one's mouth off about GDP.
Is that what you're saying that Dr. Singh did?
Let me finish my statement.
That's
One
clearly
should
what you mean.
one should not shoot one's mouth off about GDP prematurely. The implications of what has happened on GDP, I do not think anyone is in a position to have data to quantify. Don't get me wrong. I'm prepared to accept that there will be a reduction in GDP in Q3 and Q4 of this year to be more than compensated by what happens in the next financial year. But if anyone sticks his or her neck out and says that reduction in GDP is going to be of X%, I think that person doesn't know what he or she is talking about.
Well, that is as blunt as you can be about Manmohan Singh. We will leave it there. Thank you, Bibek Debroy, for taking our questions. We wish more people in government actually came out and did this, because communication, as you yourself said, is an important element of making people who don't necessarily understand economics understand a lot of this. Let's have a round of applause for our guests on the Buck Stops here today. And thank you to our audience as well.
Thank you.